It was a bright and hopeful day in the galaxy. For years, humanity had worked hard to secure peace with the Galactic Council. There were countless meetings, negotiations, and promises made. The Council had promised cooperation, unity, and protection for all its member worlds. Humanity, still fresh from its past conflicts, hoped for a future free from war. But today, that dream began to crumble. At the heart of this betrayal was Commander Rachel Kane, a respected leader in the human fleet. She sat in the war room, her hands tightly gripping the armrests of her chair. The news was too much to believe. The holographic display in front of her showed the official announcement from the Council. The message was cold and direct. The Galactic Council has declared new regulations that will limit humanity's autonomy in the galaxy. From now on, human territories are under Council control. Rachel's heart sank. The Council, which had once promised peace and respect, was now taking control of humanity's future. This was not just a minor political shift, it was a betrayal. For years, the Council had been negotiating with humanity, claiming to be allies. They promised that humanity would be treated as an equal member of the Galactic Council. But now they were being reduced to mere subjects. Rachel turned to her team, her face grim. "This isn't a policy change. It's an attack. They're trying to control us." She spoke to her trusted officers, who shared her disbelief. "How could they do this? How could they turn on us like this?" One of her officers whispered, his voice shaking with anger. The betrayal was not just political, it was personal. Humanity had worked too hard, sacrificed too much for this to happen. They had sent their best diplomats, their brightest minds, to negotiate with the Council. And now it seemed all their efforts had been in vain. The promise of peace had been shattered in a single, cold statement. Rachel's mind raced. She knew the Council well. She had seen the way they operated. They were calculating, ruthless, and efficient. But what she didn't understand was why now. Why, after years of negotiations and cooperation, had they chosen this moment to reveal their true intentions? Was this an act of desperation? Or had the Council never really seen humanity as equals in the first place? The room fell silent as everyone digested the shocking news. In the silence, Rachel felt a deep sense of betrayal not just by the Council, but by the very idea of peace that humanity had fought so hard to build. She thought of the countless people who had sacrificed their lives, their families, to bring humanity to this moment of supposed peace. All of it, it seemed, had been for nothing. But Rachel wasn't one to back down. She knew that the first step in responding to this betrayal was to understand why it had happened. The Council had underestimated humanity's strength, its ability to adapt and fight back. Rachel looked around the room at her officers, their faces now set with determination. "We may have been betrayed," she said, her voice steady, "but we're not finished. We're going to make sure the Council knows exactly what humanity is capable of." The words felt like a spark in the darkness. There was still hope, but it wouldn't be easy. The galaxy had just changed, and humanity was about to prove that they weren't going to stand by while their future was stolen. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where peace was no longer an option, and the fight for survival was about to begin. But Rachel knew one thing for sure. The Council had made a grave mistake, and humanity wasn't about to let them get away with it. The days following the Council's betrayal were filled with tension and uncertainty. Commander Rachel Kane paced back and forth in the war room, the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. Her mind raced, trying to formulate a plan, a strategy, but every option seemed to have its risks. The Council had made its move. Now humanity had to make theirs. But how? The Council's decree was clear. Humanity was no longer an independent force. Their fleets, once free to roam the stars, now operated under the watchful eyes of the Council. No more decisions could be made without Council approval. For years, humanity had fought for peace, believing that cooperation was the key to the future. But in the blink of an eye, all of it had been erased. They had been reduced to mere pawns in a galactic game they hadn't even realized they were playing. Rachel's officers, once her most trusted allies, were now shaken. They were warriors, fighters, not politicians, and the suddenness of the betrayal left them reeling. The atmosphere in the war room was thick with the weight of disappointment and anger. No one had seen this coming. No one had prepared for it. But Rachel couldn't afford to dwell on the shock. There was no time to mourn the loss of their illusions. Humanity had to act fast. She turned to her closest advisors, her voice firm but filled with the urgency of the moment. We need to mobilize. We can't let them dictate our future. Her eyes swept across the room, making sure each officer understood the gravity of the situation. We've always had the strength to stand on our own. We just need to remember that. The room buzzed with activity as plans began to take shape. They would need to go underground, to operate in secrecy for now. The Council's surveillance was vast, and any attempt at rebellion would be crushed before it even had a chance to ignite. But there were whispers in the ranks, whispers of a resistance, hidden in the shadows, waiting for a signal. Humanity was not a broken species. The Council might think they had won, but they hadn't counted on the fire that burned inside the hearts of people who had fought for their freedom for centuries. Rachel's team worked quickly, gathering the most loyal and resourceful individuals from across human space. It wasn't just about military might, it was about inspiring the people, uniting them in the face of tyranny. The rebellion needed to grow, slowly at first, until it was undeniable. The Council could crush a few ships, but it couldn't fight an entire galaxy of people willing to risk everything for freedom. But Rachel knew the real battle would be fought not just in space, but in the hearts and minds of those who had been betrayed. She had to remind them why humanity had fought for peace in the first place, not to bend the knee to a corrupt council, but to build a future where every individual had the right to decide their own destiny. As the rebellion began to take shape, the first stirrings of hope spread through the ranks. The Council might have crossed the line, but humanity wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not ever. It was time to remind the galaxy that peace was never meant to come at the cost of freedom. The fight had just begun. The rebellion began in whispers, in secret meetings held in dark corners of human space, far from the watchful eyes of the Council. Commander Rachel Kane knew that if humanity was to have any chance of regaining their autonomy, they needed to strike quickly and quietly. A single spark could ignite a fire across the galaxy. But they had to be careful. Every move was a risk. Every decision carried the weight of an entire species' future. The first mission was a small one, a test of what they could accomplish when working outside the Council's reach. A human freighter, long thought to be a simple trading vessel, had been converted into a hidden base of operations. The crew, loyal to the cause, had been secretly recruiting and stockpiling resources for months. The plan was simple: infiltrate a Council-controlled planet, retrieve vital intelligence, and leave before they were even noticed. It was a task that seemed small, almost insignificant, but Rachel knew better. Every victory, no matter how small, was a message to the galaxy. Humanity wasn't going to lie down and accept their fate. As the mission began, the tension was palpable. The freighter cut through the cold depths of space, barely a whisper against the stars. Inside, the crew worked with practiced precision, double-checking every detail. Rachel stood in the command center, her gaze fixed on the holographic map before her. The target was a Council research facility, hidden in the heart of a major human settlement. If they could uncover what the Council was planning there, it might be the key to turning the tide. The team moved swiftly, landing on the planet under the cover of darkness. No one suspected a thing, at least. That's what Rachel hoped. They had no idea how long they had before the Council's security forces would catch wind of their presence. As they infiltrated the facility, the eerie quiet of the night seemed to press in on them, the weight of the operation hanging heavily in the air. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's plans. Inside the facility, the team worked quickly, gathering data from the Council's most secretive operations. As they downloaded the last of the information, an alarm suddenly blared, breaking the silence. It was a trap. The Council had been expecting them all along. The crew's hearts raced as they scrambled to leave, the sound of footsteps echoing in the dark hallways behind them. But Rachel remained calm, her mind working faster than her pulse. "Stay focused," she ordered, her voice steady as ever. "We can't let this be for nothing." The team sprinted through the corridors, narrowly avoiding security patrols. It was a game of cat and mouse now, one that they couldn't afford to lose. The freighter was waiting for them, but the path to safety was getting narrower. As they neared the docking bay, a sudden blast shook the ground beneath them. The facility's outer defenses had been activated, sealing off their escape route. In that moment, Rachel felt the weight of the rebellion's future resting on her shoulders. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a statement. Humanity wasn't backing down. With no time to waste, she made a decision, an extreme one. "We're going through the back way." "Now," she shouted. The crew followed her lead, pushing through the chaos. As a final blast from the facility's security system rocked the hall, the last moments were a blur, dodging fire, making impossible decisions, but in the end, they escaped. The vital data in hand. They had struck a blow against the Council. It was a small victory, yes, but one that would echo across the stars. Humanity had a chance, a real chance. As they returned to the freighter and slipped back into the depths of space, Rachel couldn't help but feel the tiniest spark of hope. They had done it. The fight for freedom had begun, and the Council had underestimated them. The momentum from their last victory was still fresh in the air, but the Council was not going to sit idly by. Rachel knew they were being hunted now. Every corner of the galaxy was a potential trap, every mission a risk. But the rebellion had grown. It wasn't just whispers in the dark anymore, it was a movement, with people joining the cause from every corner of human space. The Council's overreach had sparked something much bigger than anyone could have predicted. And Rachel, now more than ever, had to be the leader humanity needed. The next mission was crucial. They had acquired intelligence about a Council fleet gathering in the Outer Rim. A fleet large enough to crush the rebellion in one swift strike. This wasn't just about intelligence anymore. It was about survival. Rachel knew that if the fleet wasn't stopped, all the progress they had made would be lost. The rebellion, fragile as it was, would be wiped out before it had a chance to truly ignite. Rachel and her team were given an impossible task: infiltrate the fleet and sabotage it from within. It was suicide, everyone knew it, but they had no choice. If they didn't take action now, humanity would lose the war before it even began. The operation was delicate. The Council's fleet was heavily guarded, and any sign of tampering would mean immediate annihilation. But Rachel had something the Council didn't: human ingenuity. They were outnumbered, yes, but they could outthink their enemies. That's what she believed, and that's what kept her pushing forward even when the odds seemed impossible. They boarded an unmarked ship, disguised as a supply transport. The crew was made up of volunteers, brave men and women who had signed up for this mission, knowing they might never return. The plan was simple: infiltrate the fleet, disable their communication systems, and cause enough chaos to cripple their offensive as they made their way toward the fleet. Tension filled the ship. The crew worked silently, their faces etched with the gravity of their mission. Rachel stood at the helm, guiding the ship through the darkness of space, every movement deliberate. The vastness of the galaxy seemed to close in on them, the weight of their actions pressing against her chest. Once they were inside the fleet's perimeter, things got complicated. The Council's ships were not just advanced, they were everywhere. The fleet was a maze of colossal warships, each one a fortress in its own right. Rachel's heart raced as they maneuvered through tight spaces, trying to avoid detection. Every second felt like an eternity. The plan hinged on a moment of silence: no alarms, no mistakes. The team would infiltrate the main command vessel, disable its weapon systems, and broadcast a message to the entire fleet. The message wasn't just a call for help, it was a declaration. Humanity would not go quietly. They made their move. As Rachel and her team infiltrated the command ship, the tension reached its peak. Every step brought them closer to the heart of the fleet. Every move was calculated, every breath measured. When they finally reached the control room, everything seemed to freeze. For a moment, Rachel wasn't sure if they had made it or if they were already too late. Then, the unthinkable happened. A silent alarm blared through the ship. The Council had figured out their plan, but it was too late. The message had already been sent. Humanity had made its stand, and there was no turning back now. The rebellion had found its voice, and the Council's reign was no longer certain. As the command vessel exploded in the distance, Rachel knew that the future was uncertain. But one thing was clear: the fight was far from over. The spark they had ignited was now afire, and no matter what the Council did, they would not be able to extinguish it. The victory they had just won was fleeting. The sabotage of the Council fleet had made a statement, but the cost of their actions was already becoming clear. The galaxy was a dangerous place for those who dared defy the Council, and Rachel knew that the rebellion, though growing, was still fragile. The Council would retaliate. The question wasn't if, but when. Word had spread quickly. Humanity's defiance was no longer a secret. From the farthest corners of human space, messages flooded in, messages of support, of hope. The rebellion was gathering strength, but with each new ally, the danger grew. The Council's spies were everywhere. Every fleet they sent out in search of rebellion only increased the tension. Rachel knew that they were walking a tightrope. One misstep and everything could come crashing down. But amidst the growing pressure, something unexpected happened. The rebellion began to form alliances with other alien species. It started with the Zoroth, a race of fierce warriors who had long been oppressed by the Council's iron grip. The Zoroth were known for their strength, but they had been quiet, waiting for a moment to rise up. When they heard about humanity's resistance, they saw a chance to reclaim their freedom. They reached out, offering their forces and their knowledge. The negotiations weren't easy. Trust had to be earned. And Rachel knew the Zoroth had been burned by promises from the Council before. They were wary of humanity's motives. But as Rachel sat across from their leader, Captain Drac, she saw something in his eyes, an unspoken understanding. The Council had broken them both. They were fighting the same battle, even if their methods and histories were different. Weeks passed as more races joined the cause. The Koroth, a peaceful species known for their advanced technology, agreed to provide their fleet in exchange for promises of protection from the Council. The Malgar, a fierce insectoid species, pledged their loyalty after their homeworld was destroyed by the Council's fleets. One by one, the fractured pieces of the galaxy came together, united by a common enemy. Rachel's heart swelled with hope as the rebellion grew. It was no longer just humanity against the Council, it was a united front, a coalition of different species, all fighting for freedom. The message was clear. The Council could no longer control the galaxy with fear alone. The rebellion had gained too much ground, and the Council was losing its grip on power. But unity came with its own set of challenges. Different species, different cultures, different ways of thinking. There were moments when the alliance felt like it might fall apart. Tensions flared as they tried to combine their forces, each race bringing its own strengths and weaknesses to the table. Old prejudices resurfaced, and the distrust between the species sometimes felt insurmountable. Still, Rachel knew this was the way forward. She had seen what was possible when species put aside their differences for the greater good. There was a power in unity, in fighting side by side with those who had once been enemies. They were all fighting for freedom, and no matter how difficult it was, they would fight together. As the new alliance took shape, Rachel couldn't help but wonder what the Council was thinking. How long would it take before they realized they had underestimated humanity and the galaxy? The rebellion was no longer just a human movement. It was a galactic one. And the Council, no matter how vast its power, could not stand against the growing tide of defiance. The true battle had only just begun. The rebellion had come a long way, but the hardest part was still ahead. Rachel stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the final preparations for the assault began. The newly formed alliance between humanity and the various alien species had brought them to this point. Together, they had amassed a formidable fleet, more than enough to challenge the Council's dominance. But as they gathered their strength, the silence before the storm felt deafening. The calm before the inevitable clash was almost unbearable. They were headed to the Council's homeworld, an objective that seemed impossible just months ago. This was no longer a small skirmish. This was the heart of the Council, where their power was rooted, where their most advanced fleets and weapons were stationed. It was a bold move, a gamble. If they succeeded, they would cripple the Council's ability to wage war. If they failed, the rebellion would be obliterated. Rachel knew the risks. She knew how dangerous this was. The Council's defenses were legendary, built over centuries of control. But they had no choice. The rebellion had made a statement, and now they needed to finish what they had started. As the fleet surged forward, her thoughts turned to the countless lives that had been lost to get them here. She thought of the brave men and women who had joined the fight, not just out of a desire for freedom, but for something more: hope. Hope for a future where the galaxy could thrive without the Council's oppression. The first wave of the assault was meant to test the Council's defenses, drawing their attention away from the main fleet. As the ships engaged in the first wave of skirmishes, Rachel's fleet moved into position. The tension on the bridge was palpable, every officer on edge, knowing the importance of their mission. They were only moments away from entering the heart of the Council's defenses. Once they crossed the line, there would be no turning back. The flagship shuddered as the first wave of attacks hit. The ship's shields flared, absorbing the blast, but Rachel felt a pang of concern. The Council was waiting for them. They had anticipated this strike, and now the real battle was beginning. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of space as laser beams cut through the void. The space around them was alive with violence. Ships darted between each other, weaving in and out of enemy fire, launching their own missiles and weapons in retaliation. The fleet was moving as one, their strength and coordination greater than anything the Council could have predicted. But that wasn't enough. They needed to reach the Council's command center and strike at the heart of their power. Every minute that passed without success made the risk greater. Rachel could feel the pressure mounting. Her mind raced, calculating every possible move, every risk. They were almost there, but the enemy was relentless, forcing them to fight harder and harder for each inch of ground. Then, just as the flagship made its move toward the command center, a sudden shockwave rocked the fleet. A new weapon, something unlike anything they had seen before, had been unleashed. The shockwave tore through the fleet, knocking ships off course and sending debris flying. Rachel gripped the armrests of her chair as the ship swerved violently, narrowly avoiding the blast. The Council had anticipated this attack, and they were not going down without a fight. But Rachel didn't flinch. She steadied herself and gave the order to push forward. "We've come this far," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We're not stopping now." The rebellion was on the verge of victory, and no amount of force would stop them. As the fleet pressed forward, Rachel knew one thing for certain: humanity had finally found its place in the galaxy. They were not just survivors anymore, they were warriors, and this war was theirs to win. The battle had raged for hours, the weight of it settling like a dark storm over the battlefield. The rebellion had broken through the outer defenses, but the Council's stronghold remained intact. Rachel stood at the helm of the flagship, her eyes fixed on the holographic display, watching as their forces fought tooth and nail against overwhelming odds. The odds had never been in their favor, but now they were so close to the Council's final line of defense. The command center was within reach, but the cost was steep. The fleet had suffered losses, and many of their best had already fallen. The question now was simple: could they finish what they started? The flagship shuddered as another barrage of enemy fire slammed into its shields. The crew worked in a frantic rhythm, desperate to keep the ship intact. It was clear that the Council was not willing to give up their grip on the galaxy without one final, all-out effort to crush the rebellion. Rachel felt it, the pressure of it all, the responsibility of leading the last push, the fear that perhaps they had miscalculated. But there was no turning back now. "All ships, move to attack formation," Rachel ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We're not just fighting for victory anymore, we're fighting for every future generation. In this galaxy, we push forward. We take control." The fleet responded instantly. Ships maneuvered in unison, each one responding to the call with precision and determination. This was their moment, the moment when everything would either fall into place, or the galaxy would slip back into darkness. The rebellion's forces, human and alien alike, had one goal: to end the Council's reign once and for all. As they approached the Council's command center, a series of explosions rocked the flagship, throwing everyone off balance. Rachel gritted her teeth as alarms blared, the entire bridge shaking with the force of the impact. She had anticipated resistance, but nothing prepared her for the sheer ferocity of the Council's final counterattack. They had unleashed their last line of defense, an immense superweapon that could obliterate entire fleets in seconds. It was their final card, and they had played it with terrifying efficiency. Rachel knew time was running out. If they didn't act fast, the superweapon would wipe out the entire rebellion. "Initiate the attack now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't wait any longer." The flagship, with its allies close behind, surged forward, cutting through the firestorm of energy blasts. The superweapon loomed ahead, a massive force of destruction. But Rachel saw a weakness, a small window of opportunity in the heart of the weapon's power core. They had to get in close, closer than any of them had dared before, with everything on the line. Rachel ordered the final, daring maneuver. The fleet followed her lead, closing the gap between them and the superweapon. The flagship was taking hits, but Rachel didn't flinch. The moment was now or never. The rebellion's forces surged forward with everything they had, launching a full-scale assault on the superweapon. In a final, explosive strike, the core of the weapon was breached, sending shockwaves through the entire command center. The Council's last hope was gone. The war was over. As the dust settled, Rachel stood in the command center, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the battle. The flagship was battered, and their forces had suffered immense losses. But the galaxy had changed forever. The rebellion had won. Humanity was free, looking out at the wreckage of the battlefield. Rachel couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The price had been high, but the galaxy was no longer under the Council's thumb. It was a new beginning, one that would be shaped by the courage and sacrifice of those who had refused to give up. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy. They were no longer pawns. They were free.